Iceland in January. I just recently got back from a trip to Iceland. It was awesome. I would not recommend going to Iceland in the winter. Definitely not for the faint of heart, mostly because it's a little bit cold and very windy. The weather was not great while I was there. The wind actually knocked one of the lenses out of my glasses and shattered our rental car window. Those things aside, it was actually a really awesome trip and I think I got some cool photos from it. So today I have 3 photos that I want to edit along with you guys. I like doing this type of video, editing photos from a place that's not where I normally take photos because the landscape looks so different that it kind of lends itself to a different editing style than I would normally go with. My first shot here, if you've been watching Peter McKinnon for a while, you might recognize this location. This is the airplane crash in Iceland. So we've got a naturally kind of bluish tone to this image. I'm gonna warm it up a bit, but I wanna keep a little bit of that blue color temperature in there. I'm also gonna shift the tint into the green just the tiniest bit. I don't like to get too crazy with creative effects with the white balance. If I'm gonna do that with color, I'm gonna add that in after the fact. I'd rather get the white balance close to what I want for a sort of more realistic look first, and then I can add some more colors later. Up the contrast, but we're getting this part of the plane here is getting a little bit blown out. So we're just gonna bring the highlights down, the shadows up a tiny bit, and then we're gonna bring the whites up, blacks down a good amount. A little bit of texture and clarity, don't go overboard. I'm gonna do a bit of an S curve here with the tone curve and then drag up the black point just a tiny bit. This is an effect a lot of people do where you drag it up like this and you get this like really washed out black look. I don't want to do this to the extreme. I'm gonna do it like seriously just a tiny little bit. All right, with the basic edits done before and after. Already a noticeable difference. We're kind of creating an atmosphere here. Not much I can do with the color mixer because there's basically just one color in this image. It's the bluish color. Color grading, I'm gonna play around with this because the image is so neutral. I can kind of add in whatever I want here. This is where the sort of differing editing style because of the location really comes in. Normally in most images, I would never add a warm color like orange to the shadows, but I think in this case it's gonna work because it's gonna kind of go against the natural blue colors and make the sand here look actually a little more neutral color. You kind of see here, the sand went from being that bluish color to more of a neutral color without getting rid of the sort of overall blue hue of our whole image. Now, I think I'm gonna lean into the greens a little bit here and add some greens into our midtones. This one's gonna have to be really subtle or else it's gonna look weird. Go with that, let's see, before and after. Pretty subtle. I am gonna drag the shadows down just a little bit, add a little more contrast in there. Generally adding a color into the shadows in the color grading will wash out the shadows a little bit, so sometimes I like to bring that down. Detail, I'm not gonna change anything here, just drag up the masking. Fun little trick, if you hold down Alt when dragging the slider, the image goes black and white and you can see exactly which parts of the image you're sharpening. For effects, I'll add a slight vignette here to kind of draw our eye into the middle. Because this is such a neutral color and it's all kind of one color, if you add too much of a vignette here, it's gonna become really obvious really quickly and I don't wanna go for this effect. I think it's kind of cheesy, so literally -4 on the vignette. And then some creative grain because why not? And I think I'm gonna actually move this more towards a yellow color than green. I kind of changed my mind on that one. All right, now for a couple local adjustments. If you've seen one of these videos before, you know that I like to use local adjustments to draw the eye into the subject of the image, which of course is the airplane here. So we're gonna do that by adding one linear gradient at the bottom here. We're just gonna drag it out like this, very gradual. And we're just gonna bring the exposure down. And then we're gonna do something similar to the sky, but not quite to the same extent. And we're just gonna bring this down a little bit, not nearly as much. I'm also gonna zoom in here and just brush the top part of this plane here because it is quite bright and it's starting to get into that blown out territory that I don't really want. I wanna save those details. And I'm just gonna use a harder edge to erase that there so it doesn't look like I masked it. Just getting rid of that feather line. And then just bring the exposure down on this a little bit. Remember, subtlety is key. And now we're gonna do a little reverse vignette by adding a little bit of brightness to the rest of the airplane. There, I'm gonna do one more a little bit bigger. For reference, this is with no masks, and this is with our masks. Just to recap, this is what we started with out of camera, and this is where we're at. Now, one last thing I'm gonna do to this image is you can see, that's not a person, that's actually a stack of rocks, but there are some people over here with their selfie sticks. I'm gonna remove these people. Some will argue that it's not very realistic to edit out tourists out of all your photos, but I'm going for a nice, clean, artsy photo here, so I'm gonna Control E and bring this into Photoshop. Now, I used to have to clone stamp things like this out, but Generative fill makes this super easy. Just take the lasso tool, select our people here. I can even do multiples in one go, because it's just these people here. Select that and hit generative fill, and Photoshop will remove that for us. AI is going to take over my job soon, and they're perfectly removed. Look at that. And there we go, it's back in Lightroom, and that one's done. Next image. This is one of my favorite shots from the trip. I took it with my Air 3 drone. It's actually an HDR panorama. I already composited the images together, so we have this DNG file that we can still edit like a RAW file, but it's composed of a few different images. Let's start by changing the crop to 2:3 because the drone shoots in 4:3, and just realign it so the horizon is a little more in the center. I'm gonna warm it up a little bit. Again, just like the last image, I do like the natural blueness to it, but we also have the sunrise hitting these mountain peaks, and I wanna make sure that the warmth of the sunrise is really coming through. Add some contrast, highlights down, shadows up a tiny bit. Now we have from this to this. It is amazing how just the basic adjustments and fixing the color and contrast can make a big difference like that. Okay, with the color mixer here, I'm gonna desaturate the blues a little bit, shift the hues ever so slightly. Again, it's so easy to go with something like this and just make it look really unnatural, but tiny little bit. And then there looks like a little bit of green and yellow in here. I'm gonna shift that a little bit more towards the orange. So I'm gonna shift the greens into the yellows and the yellows into the oranges a little bit. And then I'm gonna bring up the saturation of the oranges and yellows to try and bring in that sunlight warmth. I'm gonna add a little bit of warmth to the shadows again and really pull it back. Again, if this goes too extreme, we get this really unnatural color in the water. I really just want to add some warmth into the shadows of the rocks here, just so they don't look so blue and we get a little bit more depth out of the color of this image. I'm gonna add some blues to the midtones, and then I'm gonna try, let's see what it looks like if we add some warmth to the highlights. I find adding a color to the highlights usually muddies it a little bit too much, so I don't do it often, but let's see what that looks like. Before and after. I'm gonna go back and desaturate the blues a little bit more because this image is getting a little too blue for my liking. So we started with, and this is where we're at. It's good to go back and forth and just check every once in a while. I'm just gonna readjust my tone curve too. This is something that sometimes the photo editing is not always a linear process. Sometimes you make an adjustment later down the line and you realize you like that adjustment, but you don't like how the image kind of responded to it. So I'm gonna come back to my tone curve here, just adjust the contrast a little bit more. And I'm just gonna remove the color from the highlights. I don't think that worked how I wanted it to. Detail, same as before, just drag up the masking so we're not sharpening the noise in the image. And I'll just add a couple quick local adjustments. Okay, so I basically just went in here and added a bunch of radial gradients just to sort of add localized contrast to the image. So some of the gradients are a little brighter and some of them make the image a little bit darker. And this is without those adjustments, and then this is what I did. It's just a way of adding contrast without just dragging the contrast slider up and applying it to the whole image. All right, that one's done. And our last image is a photo of me that my lovely girlfriend took, looking off into the distance. Start by centering myself in the frame a little bit closer here. And I am a little bit dark. Now this is an example where I'm exposed a little bit dark so that the background retains its detail. The background is a lot brighter than me, so when I expose the image in editing for myself like this, the background gets really blown out. But thankfully, we shot in RAW and we can make adjustments to that. Now because there's a person in here, I am gonna warm it up and pay a little more attention to how I'm warming it up based on the skin tone, because I don't want to make the skin tone look weird, but I want to keep a fairly neutral color. I'm actually gonna bring the exposure back down. Can't recover all these highlights just by bringing the highlights slider down. So what I'll actually do instead is I'll expose for the mountains a little bit more like that. And then I'm gonna add a local adjustment to bring the brightness up on me. Contrast, again, a little bit of texture and clarity. We don't want to deep fry this image like that. For our colors here, I can get a little more creative because we're getting a little bit more color in this image. Just gotta be careful with the oranges slider because that's where the skin tones sit. And we are getting, as you can see, like there's like a color cast on the rocks back here. They're in the shadows, everything's looking a little bit blue. So we're just gonna bring the blues down a little bit like that. Now this is interesting. Normally the skin tones in a nice normal day here in Ontario are gonna be in sort of the orangish hue. But I just noticed here as I was playing around with these sliders, because it's cold out and my skin is a little pink from the cold, my skin tones are actually a little bit more in the magenta. As you can see, if I drag the slider, there's a big chunk of my skin tones that this affects. So that's also something that you wanna be careful of when you're making your HSL adjustments. Same with the purples. So if you are bringing up the saturation of the purples or the oranges, for example, just be careful that you're doing it to all of them, because if you bring up the saturation or bring down the saturation in one area too much, you can see it creates this really not nice effect where part of my image is like almost black and white, but part of it isn't. So if you move some of these sliders, just make sure you move the sliders next to them a little bit as well to try and keep everything within the same skin tone. This will be a nice way of warming up me a little bit. Back that off, and then we can do, I think we can do some blue in the shadows here. You know, maybe more of a green. See, it's all just experimenting. I don't know what's gonna work. I'm just here trying things out. Sometimes stuff works, sometimes it doesn't. Add our very subtle vignette. Let's see what the calibration is going to do for us. Maybe I'll adjust that a little bit. Okay, now I'm still a little bit dark in this image compared to the rest of it. My skin tones are a little bit dark and it makes them look a little grayish as well. So we're going to add 2 main local adjustments here. Now, you could just add a radial gradient over the face and that would probably accomplish the same thing, but Lightroom lets me select my person, and I'm gonna do one mask for all of me. I'm gonna bring up the exposure on me a bit. When I do this, I'm gonna make sure I'm bringing up the parts that are supposed to be bright. I'm gonna bring up the white slider a bit as well, and then I'm gonna bring the blacks down a little bit so that I'm brightening myself here, but I'm not washing it out, getting rid of all that contrast, and I'm not making it stand out too much to make it look like there's a local adjustment here. Now we're gonna do one more of these. We're gonna do another select people. Select myself, and this time I'm just going to do facial skin and body skin here and create that mask. Now for this one, we can brighten it up. I'm going to zoom back in here. We can brighten it up a little bit more, not too much. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of warmth here. Again, it's very easy to go overboard. Like this looks like I'm jaundiced, like don't do this, but we can add a tiny little bit, add a little more color into my skin tone here. Not make it look like I was freezing. Even that, like I only adjusted it by 10 and I feel like that looks like it's a little bit off. I'm gonna back that off even more. Increase the saturation a little bit. Without our masks and with our masks, now our skin tone is falling in sort of that correct level of brightness that I like to go for. Again, no masks, and then with our masks. Just brightens up the image a little bit better. And now I am gonna do my standard sort of radial gradient, draw into the center kind of thing, because I still think it helps. Because we already brightened me up a bit, I'm only gonna add a teeny little bit of this because I don't wanna overdo it. And then I'll add one more linear gradient on the ground here. And just kidding, one more radial gradient in the sky because it's still looking a little bit too bright. And with this edit, now that I'm looking at it, I think I'm actually gonna add a little bit more contrast in my tone curve. Just like that. Now that with the local adjustments, me and the background are a little closer in exposure level, I can add contrast to the whole image and it's not going to negatively affect any one part of it. Okay, and here's what we started with. And there's the edit. I really like how this one turned out. But there we go, 3 Iceland photos, 3 very different edits. This type of video is really fun, so let me know if you guys like this because I'd love to do more editing styles like this. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions or tips or any future video ideas. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.